Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. On this episode, we have our very own Mr. Mike Austin and our very own Robin Audi. And the subject matter today is wagons, minivans, and the evolution of the SUV. Now, Rob and I can talk about the whole wagon slash minivan thing because we're old. Austin's not that old. But
I'm still old, but I've owned 3 wagons.
I know you have.
I currently own a wagon and a van.
I know you do. So that's nice. Why we are the perfect trio of people to talk about these boxy, wonderful things that we love so much. So let's start way back. Let's start back in the 1950s when the wagon came out, right? When people were looking for that friendly family transportation by which they could put their kids in the way back in the tail gunner seat as they used to have them facing the opposite direction of the driver so they wouldn't even have to stare and look at their kids.
Yeah.
And just go on their merry way. So what's your first experience that you all remember in a wagon, minivan, or SUV? Let's start with wagons. What's your first wagon experience?
I remember those like school trips in the back, rear facing, making faces at the cars behind us because you could just be a little tyrant in the back. I remember coming back from lacrosse practice and being in the back facing of a wagon and hearing the Eagles Hotel California for the first time in my life.
What wagon was this? Do you remember?
God, I have no idea. It was definitely it was straight up Brady Bunch 70s stuff though, but I can't, I don't remember what it was because I was 8, or something.
All right, Austin, what's your first wagon or van experience?
I mean, wagon, I don't know the first one, but one of the most memorable from like young childhood was it was like rolling around with a bunch of cousins, and I was a little kid, like 7 or 8, and the younger of my 2 older sisters was in the way back with the cousins her age, and they were smoking, and my sister took a puff off the cigarette, and I was like, I totally ratted on her. I was like, she was smoking in the back of the wagon. Van-wise, we grew up with full-size 8-passenger wagons. So my parents
with ashtrays.
Ton. Yeah, and we would go our spring break road trip. We'd go out west, and we'd put 2 sawhorses in the back and a piece of plywood over the cargo area. So we put all the stuff underneath, and while we were driving, we would go in the back,
of course,
and lay down and take naps.
Yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of the old ones. I mean, my first wagon experience, my parents, when we were in Brooklyn, used to have a 1972 Chevelle wagon that was mustard in color with wood paneling on the side, right? And
beautiful.
Oh, it was. If I knew now, if I knew then what I knew now, oh my God. But the beauty of the old wagons, and a lot of people who have never experienced an old school wagon, was when Mike said, I sat in the way back. All right. I don't know if that's a term that kids today know. If you grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and you were involved with a wagon in any way, your family had one, if you sat in the way back, that you weren't in the second seat. You were even past the cargo area and literally sat in the tail gunner seat right in front of the bumper, where you would almost instantly be killed immediately if you were rear-ended. And this was,
and then if you survive the crash, you're on top of the gas tank. So it doesn't get better.
Doesn't get better. Just a fireball of explosion, and then your parents would just go, that's why we put them back there, right?
I mean, fine.
But wagons, I am still a massive wagon fan. Love them. My last wagon was a 92 Caprice wagon, which was there's a big forum called the GM Long Roof, and it was great. It was, it had the Oldsmobile wagon, the Chevy Caprice wagons, and the Buick Roadmaster wagons of the early 90s were, in my opinion, some of the best wagons ever made, just because of the styling and everything else, and they actually had some decent power. But they are so useful, and I feel like they have so much more room, like the big ones, than today's SUVs do.
Well, so I had a B body too. I had a 94 Roadmaster. So I got the one with the LT1, which was like
that's the one.
Power and like 305 pound-feet. And it was great on so many levels. it had like 7.5 inches of ground clearance, which is the same as an SUV today. Like it's got this super long wheelbase. You put snow tires on it. It's unstoppable.
Goes through anything.
The space. Yeah. This was back when, a full-size wagon had to basically fit a 4x8 sheet of wood.
And that wagon could.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But the other thing is it's low and it's got that one had the split tailgate. And I got to tell you.
Yeah. So good.
You can't compare even a trunk today, but especially the big tailgates today. You pop open that glass, you throw stuff in there super quick. If it's groceries or like a full bag, you got to get something out of there. Same thing. It's like
taking me back.
Like rib level. It was so good. I miss it. And like I said, it was so good at like basic day-to-day errands because the cargo space was versatile. And then on top of that, I mentioned I have a wagon now. You haul stuff on the roof. This is the thing that blows my mind with modern day. People are like, I gotta have an SUV, and it's like, you have a kayak or a paddleboard. Like my wife, I have to get on a stepping stool to put stuff on the roof of our van because it's a VW and it's tall. Like the wagon, it's just right there. Like my wife can't put anything on top of the VW. Like
right.
Why? You get an SUV versus a wagon that's like 8 inches. It makes a huge difference of like putting up a kayak or a bike. You're missing out if you're not getting a car wagon.
I had one of the biggest wagons ever made, a 1972 Chrysler 9-passenger.
You totally did.
I bought that when my kid was like 8, so they could get that full experience of sitting in the far back, rear facing. And I think that tailgate either folded down or swung out, like you had a choice or something.
That was the Caprice and the Roadmaster. It had the dual tailgate, I don't know why. Like SUVs now don't even do that anymore. And it drives me like a tailgate to me is the most functional thing and the dual action tailgate. Oh my God. That was a stroke of genius.
The Honda Ridgeline does that. The tailgate on the Ridgeline does that.
That's true. It does.
It swings out or flips down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the flip, I have my do I have two? Yeah. My two SUVs that I have three, but that's bad. My Wagoneer and my Bronco both have flip down tailgates.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love them because there is no better thing than like pulling up to somewhere, especially if you're outside, dropping the gate and just plunking down on it.
Yeah. That's cool.
So
that is cool.
But the problem is now wagons have gotten like Mike, you're talking about like your Roadmaster and like when I had my Caprice. I remember I bought it in 2016 and I paid $2,500 for a 54,000 mile Caprice wagon. That was mint. That like when I say mint, it was mint. And I sold it. I thought it was a big shot. I sold it in 2018 after putting 40,000 miles on it for $5,800. And I thought it was a rock star. Now, like a clean Roadmaster wagon with like the LT motor, you're talking about $12,000 to $18,000 for one of those.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, I went through the same thing when I bought mine. When I bought mine, I don't remember. It was somewhere under $6,000, and that was the thing. Was like if you look and you know what you're looking for, you can find it under $6,000. Good ones were like 10, 12. Nicest one of the world is 28. Now, like those cherry undriven ones are into 30, and like a good one's 18. But I don't know. Everything's expensive now. They're still good wagons.
Wagons are. I just love wagons. In fact, there was a wagon that I posted to you guys. Don't post that link up because I might actually buy it. The big old school wagons are literally some of the greatest vehicles ever made. And they used to be the stigma where like, oh, you drive a station wagon, whatever the case. And somewhere in the I don't know, the early 2000s, I think that changed to where wagons were cool because one in the early 80s, thanks to Chrysler in 84, the Chrysler Caravan came out. That changed the entire world. The entire world exploded when the minivan came out.
Yeah.
And then the SUV, also Chrysler, came out the SUVs came out in the 60s, right? With the Wagoneer. But, it's just that's I think when people actually started to take notice and say, well, these are a little more versatile than our wagon. But the only real versatile bonus to me was 4-wheel drive. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and you can get both with an AMC Eagle.
When that came out, when the AMC Eagle came out, now it makes perfect sense because it was the first Subaru wagon.
They invented the Subaru Outback.
Right? They did. Yeah. AMC invented the Subaru Outback. That's a great way to put it. but it's still totally functional.
Yeah.
All-wheel drive. Back then, it was in a real four-wheel drive system, not an all-wheel
Yep.
drive system. But Rob, you had also mentioned like the Cherokee Chief in the late 70s, right?
My favorite SUV of all time. Two-door.
Just so good. Two-door
Love
SUV. Yeah, two-door. Well, it's like my Bronco. My Bronco's two-door, and it's an F-150 basically.
Yeah.
But as for modern stuff, like Austin, you still have a fairly modern wagon and a fairly modern van. Yeah.
Yeah, I have an '08 wagon, and then the van. I mean, the van's an '01. It's the VW, so it's not. I mean, it's kind of mini. It's like a big minivan. But actually, I take that back because it's shorter than a current Odyssey or Pacifica. So what used to be the big van, it's a VW Eurovan. So what used to be the big van in 2001,
right, is
now normal size for modern minivans.
And what about your wagon? What kind of wagon?
The wagon's an 07 Saab, so it's mid-size. And that
is it a 9.3 or 9.5?
It's a 9.3. I actually was shopping 9.5s pretty hard, but I ended up with the 9.3.
I love,
and I'm not going to go down the Saab rabbit hole today, but
yeah, we could do.
But there is a whole raft of modern wagons. It's mostly BMWs and BMW or Mercedes-Benz E classes, but
those are nice.
You go to the AMG E55, E63, CTSV wagon. Like you look at the auction sites. I don't think we've had any on Hemmings recently, but those things are there all the time, and they're fetching good money. Like the wagon has transformed into this enthusiast pick. I don't know. Go back to the old stuff like you were looking at, Musto. I mean, if I'm gonna build something, like I'm gonna do a resto mod or restoration or drop an engine in something, definitely doing it with a wagon. Like I can't afford the blue chip, regular body style. So if you're building anyway, do it.
Yeah, but the wagons now, I feel like are becoming blue chip stuff. I mean, years ago, you could get a satellite or a C-body wagon, or even like an old LTD wagon, $2,000, $2,500 for like a decent one. And now, if you find a decent one, it's $12,000, $16,000, and you're like,
you know what though? You know who's never given up on wagons is Volvo, right? So you've got the Amazons, the 240s. I've owned 240 wagons. 740. I bet you could get a good deal on a 740 wagon still, because nobody seems to want those. 940 wagon, 850 wagon, V70 wagon. You can get those cheap still, and they're pretty good.
So who came? Because Volvo, I remember, was it the T5R wagon that Volvo had? That was a badass. That came out, and I saw a yellow one with black wheels, and I was like, "What the hell was that?"
That was the 850 series, right? Yeah. Those are great.
And you could get those in a manual, right?
Yeah,
you had a manual, and the cabin air intake was somewhere near the wheel well. So if you do a burnout in them, it would actually suck tire smoke in your vents.
That's good to know.
I mean, it's funny because they used to be the problem with finding a clean wagon is that most wagons from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s were family cars, right? So parents piled their kids in the back, they put all their crap in the back. So to find one that's been unscathed is really, really difficult because they were just, I don't want to call them beater cars, but they were basic family transportation. And I remember, years ago we had a 79 LTD wagon. It was green with wood paneling, and we always used to find birds dead next to it because they thought it was a tree and they would fly right into it. So you'd be sitting outside and all of a sudden you'd hear dunk, and we'd be like, and we'd go outside, and of course there'd be a dead bird that just cratered its whole skull into its chest because it flew head first into the wagon. But the usability of those wagons, I think, honestly, if you don't need all-wheel drive, is still far superior to today's SUVs. Would you agree with that or no? Because Mike, you brought up a good point of getting roof access, and I think that's one, but also just the vastness of the storage area in the back. It just seems so much bigger back then.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare the V70 wagon that I had, the Volvo, to my wife's current XC60, the V70 definitely fit more stuff, for sure.
I mean, if you compare the 9.3 to an SUV of the same footprint, the SUV is going to have bigger. I think it's going to have bigger cargo, but it's more of, I think, the practical like living with it, or the intangibles you don't realize. It's like, yeah, you got this huge cargo space in an SUV, but like it's tall. How often are you carrying tall stuff? Or, how often are you stacking stuff above the seat height? Not that much. So the wagons are better that way. And you're right, Mike. I mean, they're used up, which is like, segue to the minivans. Like before we got on here, I tried to look up like, have minivans taken off? Like what are the auction reports on minivans? They're not there. If you look at, a 10-year-old mini, those aren't collectible at all. Like, and if you look at used listings, I mean, good luck trying to find a low mileage minivan. And then, the ones that you do see are like 150,000 miles and they're beat up.
Yeah.
But so, it'll be interesting to see where those go. Cause I think,
the little Japanese ones
stuff
from the 80s are worth something now. The Toyota, the first one, what is it? The Previa, what is it? The little
the egg.
Yeah, but what was before the Previa, Mike?
That was just a Toyota van.
Yeah, okay, the Toyota van, which was more angular, and it was interesting because that type of that time period. Do you remember like? Because first you had the Chrysler minivan, which was the king, right? And arguably still is the king with the Pacifica. But you had that, and then everybody kind of jumped on the bandwagon, right? Honda came out with the Odyssey. Toyota came out with the their version of the minivan. Ford had that angular Astro van, which if you had ever driven one, it had the longest shifter stalk on the floor in the history of the world.
Ford had the Aerostar. GM was the
Aerostar. Yeah.
Right. GM had, right. I'm sorry. The Astro van, which was the world's favorite contractor van in the world, right? And those even eclipsed the full-size vans, right? Because we always had full-size work vans. There were always Ford Econolines and Chevy, Savannah vans, I think they were called, or whatever.
Yeah, but those weren't comfortable or good to
drive.
No,
they were contractor vans, whatever. And then you had the conversion vans of the versions of those, right? Whether it was a conversion Astro, a conversion Econoline, or whatever the case was, but they were more campers as opposed to passenger vans. But when, like, in my opinion, the minivan is probably the most, like, if somebody said you have one vehicle for the rest of your life that you have to drive and it has to fulfill everything, I would be like, find me an all-wheel drive Chrysler minivan. Like, because and I hate to say it, but my God, talk about the most useful thing in the world. Like, go anywhere, do anything, stuff anything in it. Useful.
Well, I mean, I have to admit, as somebody like you've been on the press car circuit for like 10 years, when you get a minivan, it's just like, it's awesome. Because there's a couple things you've been putting off doing, or somewhere you need to go, and you're like, sweet. Now I've got the minivan. I can just go fill it with everything and move it over here. Yeah.
I could take my bikes to the bicycle shop. I could put a motorcycle in the back. I could put 1,500 pounds of mulch.
As hell, and they're so easy to drive.
And they have 300 horsepower. I mean, these things are quick.
Right. Dude, the new, like the Pacifica, the Chrysler Pacifica hybrid is like legitimately quick. Like you stomp that thing and take the traction control off, like you'll roast the front tires. Like it's quick.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that I all the journalists, like anytime a new wagon comes out, the journalists come out and they go, it's the greatest thing. We're all going to buy one. It's great. And then nobody buys it.
Nobody buys it.
The CTSV wagon came out and everybody was like, oh my God, this is great. I'm going to buy one. They sold like 7.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dodge back in the early or the mid 2000s, they had the Magnum, which was way ahead of its time. And I actually had an SRT8 Magnum, which was, listen, for what it was a 168 mile an hour hearse. That was fantastic. But again, nobody really bought them. Right?
I mean, I think Volvo and Subaru are the only
nobody
two
is
brands.
selling them.
Yeah, well,
Everyone
Volvo and
that
Subaru
has an SRT8 Magnum knows what they have. And they are not
I know. Dude, I sold mine in 2013. When I moved to California, that's what I moved out here in. And I sold it in 2013 with 64,000 miles on it. And I sold it for over $20,000 back then, which was a ton of money for that thing because they made so few of them, right? Now, trying to find a clean SRT8 Magnum, you find one with sub $20,000, sub 20,000 miles, prepare to pay 35 grand. It's crazy. It's crazy.
It is crazy.
Well, so I mean, that's the interesting thing is like, it's this cyclical thing in collector car world, right? Is like the stuff that we all go nuts over, or that was super rare, that's super rare. It's super rare because nobody bought it, right? Like there's a few cars, performance cars and muscle cars, where they just tried to sneak them out as homologation and nobody really knew they existed. So there's only like 15 of them. But most of the stuff was like, they made this and it was too expensive, or, you know, like the engine package doubled the price. And that's the same thing with wagons. Every automaker is giving up on wagons. And you know, Volvo
and Subaru are the only two, ones that stick with them.
But Volvo won't sell the straight wagon anymore. I think you can only get the cross country.
Yeah, you're probably
you can
right.
only get the lifted one. And every time with the new car companies, they're like, oh man, there's great demographics on it. It's like super high household income. It's like, it doesn't matter. Nobody buys them. But then 10 years later, every CTSV wagon, you know, you can't get a CTSV wagon for less than probably original sticker price now.
Didn't Buick make a nice one recently? Didn't Buick come out
they
with
did
one?
actually. Yeah. What the hell was it called, Mike? It was the Buick.
It was the Regal Tourex.
They probably gave up on it already. Did they give up?
No, at the nadir of like Regal, you know, when like this thing is getting killed, and I forgot what year. Like there was just something where like right before Corona, there was like a glut of used car deals because, you know, like volume was slowing down or something.
Yeah.
You get those things for like 30% off. It was
so they're done with it. They gave up on it.
Yeah, it's no longer being made.
Now it's
no longer being made. Well, let me ask you this: why do you think that? Like, say this, I'm gonna throw the Subaru Outback out there because that, in my opinion, is not really a wagon anymore. It has morphed into a full size SUV, right? Because if I park a Subaru Outback next to my Wagoneer, it's kind of the same size, which is insane to me.
Can you still get the Legacy wagon, or they get just the Legacy 4-door sedan?
No, just the Legacy 4-door.
That's sad.
Well, Mike, what did you forward me? You forwarded me a Legacy wagon that was awesome. Was that an 08?
Oh, I did the 05, so I don't know which generation it is, but it's the one with like the really low front. And they made, to me, it's still my favorite Legacy, but they made a 2.5 GT, and that's super rare. If you can find with a manual, I mean, I don't know how many they sell. It's less than 10,000, but like, that thing, that's a unicorn, but it's also sweet. It's basically like, you know, a big WRX.
Yeah,
like a little more refinement.
Yeah, I think there's, you know, it's difficult because like I want another wagon. There's no question about it. But then I think about, am I going to use it? Right. Aside from the cool fact, at least what I perceive as cool, am I going to do wagon things with it? Like I've got 3 SUVs right now, and do I do SUV things? No. Like I don't really haul stuff. I don't really go off road. But yet I still convince myself that I should be paying, you know, $5.25 a gallon for something that gets 12 miles to the gallon, and it makes no sense. But still have them.
So here's a question. We'll take it. I mean, and again, I keep trying to pull this back to the classical because I don't want to just talk new stuff. So I don't know exactly how this applies, but you know, going back to the Maverick, we were talking about the Maverick and the Bronco. Like 2 days later, I'm in Southwest Detroit, so it's where you'll see the Maverick. But I saw like 3 Mavericks in the course of a half an hour, and I was kind of saying like, yeah, this thing's pretty sweet for a new car, but would you get that because it's just like a huge trunk, right? You can get a cargo cover on it, and you can throw stuff in the back, or do you really want the wagon, right? You know, the equivalent would be the Bronco Sport or, you know, some other modern wagon equivalent. That's the real question to me today is like, get an old pickup or one of the new small pickups and have that, like, I don't know, you don't have the giant tailgate, or, you know, keep stuff inside with you.
I like the idea of, you know, if you don't use it, like I had a pickup, I had an F-150 and I've had a Dakota in the past and stuff like that. But I like to have my stuff secure because anywhere you go in a pickup truck, it's exposed. And I don't like that, whereby if I have an SUV that's essentially the same size, I can put all my crap in the back and it's under lock and key. Is it more difficult to haul like a bicycle around? Sure. But I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm not hauling stuff. But the Maverick, I know and I hate to go back to it, but the real sales case for a Maverick is that it's cheaper than a Prius and looks 10,000 times as good.
All right, so we're going back to wagons, though. I think the answer here is, you want your stuff secure. You're driving stuff that's 12 miles to the gallon. Move into a wagon, You know, even if you got a big block, you're going to get like 15 or 16, right?
Maybe not. I mean,
but you'll do better than your trucks.
Yeah, I mean, the best mileage thing that I currently own is the 911, but everything else gets sub 16 miles to the gallon.
Yeah.
Every other car I have is sub 16. So like the Bronco gets 12, the Grand Wagoneer or the Grand Wagoneer gets like 6. The Grand Cherokee, that's a 15 miler to the gallon. Right?
Right. So the Roadmaster got 18, and
that's fantastic.
It was very much like you could brush 20 miles per gallon at like 65. You bump up to like 75, you're getting 16, and it was hilarious because that's when I started driving like the speed limit just to save like $4. It's like turning down the thermostat. It makes almost no difference at the end of the month, like those 2 degrees, but for some reason I just got it in my head and it drove my wife nuts because she's like, you were driving like an 80-year-old Buick owner, right? I'm like, I don't care. This thing is so comfortable and smooth. Nothing matters to me. Like, when are we gonna get there?
So why did you get rid of it? Why'd you get rid of it?
I had I was getting press cars at the time, and I wasn't driving it that much.
Mm-hmm.
And it's huge. It's like 18 plus feet
it's big.
And in one house it fit by literally like less than 10 inches, and then I moved. And it pushes on to like part of my garage has like this extra add-on apron, and it like even hung into the apron area.
Yeah.
It was just like, this is taking a bunch of space. I'm not owning it. I sold it to a friend who prepped it for sale and then decided he couldn't let it go. And so
that's nice. That's nice.
I'm not saying it's a car I'd buy back, but it would be in my roster if I had like a ridiculous fleet or like a vacation home that needed a car parked there.
Well, as someone who has both a van and a wagon, right? Because you have the best of both worlds. What do you what do you use more? What do you find more useful? And also that has a family.
So the van got pushed into, the van was bought as a road trip car because it was we don't want to use it up. It's a Volkswagen, and things break, and there's just no need to do like hard drive wear and tear on it. It immediately got pushed into daily driver duty. We don't really do short errands anyway, so it's not, we're not like sitting in traffic or doing a lot of stop and go. But in the summer, it's the daily driver because you step in, you got room to move around. It's easy to load a kid. There's there's space between the seats. Mm-hmm. You're sitting up high. The wagon is, the thing with the van is, it's a 2001 van. It drives like a box. It's it's kind of slow. It's got a lot of mass. So the difference is the wagon is just way more fun to drive. And like you feel like you're going somewhere. It's the van is fun, but it's more like carnival ride fun. It's not driving enjoyment fun.
Is your wagon a manual?
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Wow, that's really rare. Wow.
Yeah, it's an Aero, man. This is what led me to it. Sorry, I didn't want to do the Saab thing, but it's like you shop for used cars, you're looking at BMWs, and then you like keep going down in price, and then the Saab starts showing up, and you're like, these are a really good deal.
Yeah.
And then you start looking further. Exactly. And they're criminally undervalued.
Right.
But it's like the V6 turbo manual, which is I don't know, there was like less than 2,000 in that year.
It's a neat car.
I got a good one.
Yeah, that is cool. That is cool. So what do you think? Do you think that the trend of because now it's SUV, right? If you have a family, yes, the minivans still sell, but the majority are SUVs, right? Because a lot of people just don't, for whatever reason, want to drive a minivan. And I get that to a point. Do you think the wagon's ever going to make a comeback? Or do you think it's pretty much dead and buried?
I think it's dead.
I think it's kind of already here, right? Like we've reached the singularity. I can't think of a specific car, but if you look at some new cars, they're like a Mercedes GLA. That thing's a wagon. It is.
Yeah. What about a whatever it is, a Porsche Taycan Cross Tour or whatever the hell they call it? You know what I mean? Or what, the Gran Turismo, which is basically just wagon. By a different,
I mean, our
that?
Volvo
Would you consider that a wagon?
Our Volvo XC60 is kind of a wagon. I mean, by some measure.
Like, how do
Yeah, I
you
mean, the difference
differentiate? Is it all-wheel drive? Is that the only differentiation between a wagon and an SUV?
No, I mean they just call them SUVs or crossovers now. But again, like I said, they're getting lower and lower because when you're, you know, the height has to do things with like aerodynamics and fuel economy, and they're like, or they just want to have a good stance, and then all of a sudden it's only like 3 inches taller
different
than an equivalent car. I think the main difference is like the wagons of old, even the Magnum, right? I said the Roadmaster was like 18 feet long.
Yeah.
The Magnum, I remember someone I knew at the time had a Trailblazer. The Magnum was longer than a Trailblazer.
Yeah, it is big car.
I think there's also been
wagon. The wagon is the long roof, and you can tell.
Right.
Like that's what really makes a wagon.
There's been some blurring of lines between SUVs and minivans too. Like I kind of think like the Honda Pilot is practically a minivan to me. You know?
Yeah.
Or like the Toyota, what is it, the Highlander or something?
Well, there have been a couple that have treaded that line. Like when Chrysler first came out with the Pacifica, the original Pacifica back in like 06 or 07, that was like a minivan UV. You know what I mean? It was this weird kind of homologation of two and a one, and it never really worked, in my opinion.
Well, and the GMs, the Traverse and the I think Acadia, those were GM's minivan.
Perfect. That's right.
And they all have, pretty flat floor.
Yeah.
Going back to that Chrysler, though, Mike. So before the show, we were talking about the turbo Caravan. When are you gonna? Are you putting a minivan on your shopping list?
No, I had one.
For the two cars you plan to buy this year.
Yeah. No. When I left, before I got into the automotive world, it was great. Before I started my company, I was dailying an E39 M5, great car, and then I started my company and realized I need some money, and I sold my M5, and I bought a 2001 Mercury Villager minivan, and drove the wheels off that thing. No, it wasn't the Nautica edition. It was green with a beige bottom and beige cloth interior. We called it the Danger
remember
Van.
that. I remember driving around in that with you. That thing was hilarious. You loved that thing too.
I did love it. Well, but this is the weird thing. Like my wife and I, we get sucked into these things because they're so ridiculous that you just give them personality. So like the Mercury, we just called the Danger Van. There was nothing dangerous about it. It was just this crappy old van. The Caprice wagon was the battle wagon because you in your mind, you have to do something to like justify it being fun and cool. So we would just name them and then subsequently fall in love with these stupid things. They didn't do anything well. They didn't handle well. They didn't accelerate well. They didn't brake well. But you could chuck everything in them. And then once you get rid of that usefulness, you go, oh shit, well, I kind of want another one now. But I mean, I don't know. Would I get another minivan? Only if I really needed one. I would definitely be more prone to buy a wagon because I mean, I'm actually looking at one now, but I would do the wagon as opposed to the minivan right now.
The battle wagon thing reminds me because you were saying like, oh, you got to do something to make it cool. And I was like, no, you don't have to do something to make yourself feel cool in a wagon. Because the thing I learned from the Roadmaster is the wagon is acceptable in every single social situation. You go to any ethnic neighborhood, like, like the people, people are like, whoa, cool wagon. Like a place where you're like, hey, look, I don't look like the people around here. Not that anyone would give me trouble, but you don't know. Like the wagon is an ambassador, but then the same thing, like you take it somewhere fancy, like to a restaurant, the valets are like, oh man, that thing is cool. Like they park it out front before their boss is like, get that old wagon out of here.
Dude,
it works across, you go like, you can take it to a NASCAR race. You can take it to an IMSA race. Everyone loves the wagon.
You're right. You're right. It's funny. My wife used to work at the Transamerica building in San Francisco, and in the parking garage there was everything from Porsche, Ferrari, Mercedes, anything and everything. And she would roll up in this '92 Caprice wagon, and all the attendants would purposely park her right in the front because they were like, "This is our favorite vehicle." When it rolls in, and so you are 100% on point with that statement, Mike. No question about it. Everybody loves
me of this wagon we sponsored for Car Domain when I was working with Grassroots Motorsports on their Ultimate Track Car Challenge. And somebody built, because the Ford Fairlane wagon was basically a Fox body, right? So he swapped everything to Mustang and he built this incredible track car. And I was like, why did you build this? You know, it was a fully caged wagon, fast as always. He's like, I just want to humiliate Porsches. That's my only goal in life. And that was, he just loved it. It was the coolest thing. It was a freaking wagon. It was awesome.
Like I said, you can go in so many different directions with a wagon. I think wagons will always be eternally cooler than any minivan or SUV you can find. I just do. I think they're great. I hope people start looking at them more along the lines of collector vehicles and start restoring them. Like, I would love to see, I'll be honest with you, like, if there was a perfect, fully restored, like, Roadmaster wagon, I might step up for that. Like, I might buy that, because you'll never get that again. You'll never get that size, the usability. As to your point, Mike, the ultimate comfort road trip vehicle, right? Especially the one you had with the, with the LT1 in it. And I think more importantly, simple to use, not over, inundated with electronics and things like that. Just normal, old school comfort, cush, drivability, So, I don't know. That's my thought. That's my thought on wagons. I think they're better than SUVs and vans.
Cool.
So, I don't know. Any other thoughts on the subject of SUVs, wagons, or vans?
I mean, again, I'll bring it back to like my always like the same argument I make for buying a classic truck, right? It's like, if you're gonna have an old car, make it something that you have an excuse to use, right? Like, you got a GTO Judge Coupe. You're only taking that out on a nice day. You have like a Tempest wagon with a GTO engine in it. You're taking that to the grocery.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Very good point. Well, on that, we've been rambling about SUVs, wagons, and minivans for 48 minutes, which is kind of ridiculous, actually. But we love them, so we talk about them. Rob, Mike, thank you for chiming in with your experiences in the box world. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have anything that you want to talk about, if you have any, topics you want us to cover, leave it in the comments, right into Hemmings. Go look at our auctions. Go look at our auctions. Go look at our classifieds and find your favorite wagon and or minivan. And we'll see you next time on the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.